getaway, getaway now. Getaway, getaway, getaway now. Take a plane, take a train, take a car, just getaway, getaway, getaway now. No need to be far, just getaway, getaway, getaway now. The world is small, many ports to call, just getaway, getaway, getaway now.
Hi, this is Getaway Girl. I'm Regina Ayars, and I am the Getaway Girl. Although I'm certainly not a girl anymore, when I travel, I do take on a different persona. Lighter, freer, more willing to be spontaneous, and able to just go with the flow. I plan, but when the plan has to change, I can do it with less heartburn and a sense that things will actually work out. So during the next 30 minutes, come with me and see how traveling can open up new vistas for you. In this episode of Getaway Girl, Part 1 and 2, we are going to travel to Africa, to two landlocked countries, Uganda and Rwanda, to see the great apes, chimpanzees, and gorillas. Christmas and New Year's of 2014-2015, my daughter Megan and I went to Africa to see the great apes. I did my research and decided on using National Geographic. Although expensive, I wanted to feel that we would be in safe hands. The video I will be showing later in the program will let you hear from someone who had the opposite experience. Not unsafe, but totally self-organized. It's a lot of work. I am wearing a traditional dress that I bought in Uganda. Later, you will see some of the bright colors that women wear in both countries. Our itinerary started in Entebbe, Uganda, and ended in Kigali, the capital of Rwanda. We visited 4 national parks in 2 countries, crossed the equator, took boat cruises, trekked high and low in search of our great apes. We found them, and we were lucky. We had 4 sightings, plus a visit to a chimpanzee sanctuary. We arrived in Entebbe, Uganda at night, so we could not see much of the country or countryside as we drove to our hotel that was on the outside of town on the shores of Lake Victoria. Lake Victoria is the largest lake in the world and second in surface area only to Lake Superior. As an aside, Entebbe might ring a bell with some of you older folks. On July 4th, 1976, Israeli commandos rescued over 100 hostages from a hijacked Air France plane. The Jews on the plane had been separated out, and it was assumed that they would be killed. There have been several movies about this incident, but the best was The Last King of Scotland. But that's a different country and a later program. So back to Uganda. The next day, we took a day trip to the capital of Uganda, Kampala. Like many capitals of third world nations, chaos is how I would describe the city. The population is 1.5 million, but the surrounding districts include another 2 million, so 3.5 million people. But that is not really that large for an African capital. Lagos, the capital of Nigeria, was 13 million in 2015. Okay, let's hear from Sunny Anderson about Kampala and her thoughts. So Sunny, what were your impressions of the capital of Uganda, which is Kampala?
Kampala. You know, we had spent a lot of time in these little villages and some of the national parks, so it was really something coming to a more modern city. And certainly the amount of traffic and the number of people and even the buildings were quite impressive compared to what we had seen. However, there's a lot of poverty there. We spent a lot of time just kind of wandering around, going to markets and trying to get a sense of what the city was really like. And I would say I was struck by the numbers of people, by the traffic, and by the poverty.
Did you feel that there was a lot of military presence there?
We did see quite a few military, yeah. But you know, we saw that in quite a few places. In fact, the truck was stopped several times by military for no real particular reason. They'd claim that somebody didn't have the right paper, and of course the driver would say, yes, I do, here it is. And sometimes a couple of hours would go by and the driver would say it's all about bribes. You know, so just be patient. We'll just go back and forth and back and forth. And of course, for us, it was a great opportunity to get out and play with the kids in the village. Meantime, the driver and the military would be going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. But they did tell us, the driver did warn us, you know, when the military comes on board, the soldiers, they have guns, and just be quiet, don't say anything, don't do anything, don't make any sudden moves, because you don't know what's going to happen.
My experience was different. We were taken to a market meant just for tourists, and it was actually guarded by the police. These girls looked happy, but the vendors had a touch of desperation about them. This has been my experience in Africa before, when visiting Zimbabwe. Selling an item that we might call a trinket might mean food for dinner for a family or not. As Sonny said, there were lots of military around town, and we were pulled over by the military because we were seen taking a picture of a government building. They did not confiscate our cameras, but sternly questioned us. Another day trip was a short boat ride to a chimpanzee sanctuary on Ngamba Island, established 20 years ago as part of the Jane Goodall Institute. New animals are quarantined for 90 days prior to coming to the island. The 100-acre island sanctuary is home to close to 50 orphan chimpanzees. We were told if there was an emergency and the chimpanzees escaped, we should walk into the lake. Chimpanzees don't like water. This is good to know. We were taken to a tall platform where the chimpanzees gathered for meals. At the appointed hour, they came in from the forest where they spent their days and excitedly demanded their food, fruits and vegetables which are delivered to the island every 5 days. You can observe them using sticks to reach for food, which is a skill that was not known about chimpanzees until Jane Goodall observed this behavior in the wild. Chimps were all ages. Chimps live to be 30 or 40 years old if they survive to adulthood, which is considered 12 years old. Females live longer than males, as with humans. One chimp in captivity was known to live to the age of 72. That's hard to believe. They all had names and written biographies that we could read if we could match up the photos with the actual face and body of the animal. I bought this apron with Tumbo's face and name on it. And I don't think I actually ever found Tumbo. And I also bought, I'm not much of a cook, but I did buy another apron, and it has a group photo on it. So could we speed up the teleprompter, please? But I bought that because I'm a good American tourist and spend money on items that I won't ever use. A few items I'm going to show you in this episode of Getaway Girl only relate to the great apes. I bought a lot more, I can tell you that. As often happens, I had to buy another suitcase on this trip to carry home all my treasures. This was my favorite purchase, a wooden carving of chimpanzees. It hangs on the wall of my living room. Africa, that was her name, is framed and hanging in my bedroom wall. 100 years ago, there were a million chimpanzees in Africa. Now, as an endangered species, there are about 200,000 in the wild. The chimps on the island must learn to live in a community, and they roam free during the day but sleep indoors at night. Caregivers ensure that the animals are healthy, and those who have special conditions receive special diets. Bonds are developed much as with a child and a parent. Cabal National Park, our next stop, was cross-country to the Cabal National Park. The park was formally established in 1993 to protect a large area of rainforest previously managed as a log forest. The park forms a continuous forest with the Queen Elizabeth National Park. This adjoining of the parks creates a 110-mile wildlife corridor, and it's an important ecotourism destination, popular for its population of habituated chimpanzees and 12 other species of primates. We met our expert primatologist who traveled with us for the rest of the trip. She joined us on our first chimpanzee tracking experience. Before I tell you the story of my lost camera, let's listen to the chimpanzees. As you can hear, chimpanzees are very vocal and loud, unlike the gorillas, loud and boisterous like human beings. We were told that if charged, we should cling to the nearest tree and hug it. These are habituated animals, but they see humans almost daily. But that doesn't mean that they won't charge humans, even though we, humans and chimps, are the closest genetic match of all the primates, 98%. They are used to having us around, but as with the gorillas, if their young communicate any type of fear, they can attack. Let's hear from Sunny Anderson about her experience with the chimpanzees. So then I saw the chimpanzees in Rwanda, but you saw the chimpanzees in Kenya.
In Kenya, yes.
So tell us a little bit about that.
We went to a forest reserve area way off the beaten path. It was an area that I don't think a lot of people go to. There's not a huge number of chimpanzees. It's not like a national park where there, are thousands of them right there. And once again, we had to go with a ranger who led us through this forest area, and we walked and walked and walked and walked quietly, but eventually did come to where the chimpanzees were. And so once again, we were able to stop and observe them in their natural habitat, which I thought was very exciting and very interesting. But it was very fascinating to see them and sort of contrast the experience with the gorillas. In both cases, we were lucky because it was natural habitat. It wasn't like looking at an animal in the zoo. You may not have had a 100% clear view, but much more interesting to me to see them in their natural habitat and watch. The chimpanzees are just so amazing, the way they can swing from branch to branch and tree to tree and hook their tails, and just watching that was incredible.
So what was the main difference in your observations between gorillas and chimpanzees. They're both great apes, but they are certainly different.
They are certainly very different, yeah. Chimpanzees, of course, are much smaller, and they spend, at least in my experience, more of the time in the top of the trees, where the gorillas are not so much in the top of the trees. I think one of those big silverbacks probably couldn't sit. He would knock that tree down. Suckers weigh a couple 100 pounds, so that would be really difficult for them. Coloring is very different, and what they eat is different. So, you know, in terms of how they interact, they have family groups, so there's a similar theme there, that they stay together in troops. And that, I think, is they have in common. But yeah, there were similarities and there were differences, and that was what was interesting for me. You know, we didn't have a chance to study them or spend a lot of time, but just the little glimpses we had.
The one main difference I observed was that the gorillas were very quiet.
Oh.
Very, you know, just serene is the word I would use.
Really?
Whereas the chimps were more like human beings.
Yeah.
Loud, screaming and screeching and.
Huh. And see, I don't think we had that experience, because our silverback kept gurring or whatever gorillas do at us, since we were so close to his family, and the mamas and the babies were talking. Not as loudly as the chimps, you're right there, but there was certainly a lot going on. Okay. Although you heard a lot. We were close enough to the big guy, we could hear him chomping. And he would chomp, and then he'd stop and put his stick down and look at us. And then he'd chomp some more, and they'd put his stick down and beat his chest. Whereas the chimpanzees didn't do that. They paid very little attention to us. Of course, they were way up in the trees, so you know, we weren't in their face, so to speak. Whereas on this path with the gorillas, we were certainly right there, right where they were. That was not planned. It was, well, I don't even know if you'd call it serendipity. I suppose it was dangerous, but it certainly was exciting.
Okay, here is the story about my lost camera. Tracking the chimps requires traipsing through dense forests with lots of exposed roots. One of my traveling companions tripped and fell, and I reached out to break her fall. I did break her fall, and we continued on. Maybe 30 minutes later, as I reached for my camera in my pocket, I remember saying to myself, I don't have to zip up that pocket. Uh-oh, no camera. I panicked. I convinced our guide to take me and retrace our route, leaving the rest of the group alone. Not the wisest decision on his part, but off we went. He then proceeds to leave me all alone and goes further ahead. I stand there and realize that I am really alone in the middle of a rainforest, and I'm surrounded by wild creatures. I was glad when he returned, but sadly, with no camera. At the same level, I was happy to be relieved of the compulsion to have to take the perfect artistic shot. And now that I could just enjoy what was around me, others had to take the pictures. So most of these videos and pictures were taken by my daughter and by our traveling companions. They're excellent. They're very artistic. Before we leave Cabal and the chimpanzees, let me define what a great ape is and what it isn't. First, it's not a monkey. It does not have a tail. Gorillas and chimpanzees and the orangutan are the three primary great apes. They are characterized by a relatively hairless face, protrusive lips, and hands with complex fingerprints and flat nails, similar to our own. Here are two pictures, or one picture of a monkey. They have long tails and are very much smaller than the great apes. This is a Ugandan red columbus. And there is also a black and white columbus. Both of these monkeys are more abundant than chimpanzees. Most studies find that logging seems to be having a negative effect on the species, but there are some contradictions. Some species of primates are found less frequently in logged areas, but others were unaffected. Either way, stopping logging is certain in certain regions of the Cabal National Forest is crucial. The habitat of the animals is being destroyed. The night after we experienced our first great ape encounter, we stayed at a spectacular lodge on a ridge overlooking a volcanic lake. This was my favorite accommodation. It's given its spectacular location. All the beds on this trip had mosquito nets. So romantic. Although I don't recall any mosquitoes, pesticides were probably being used. The next morning, we crossed the equator on our way to the Queen Elizabeth National Park. Along the way, we see elephants. Lots of elephants. A cob, which is well, let's look at some more elephants. We took some really, or I didn't take them, but others on the trip took some beautiful pictures of elephants. They're such majestic animals, and they come in all shapes and sizes. This is a cob, an antelope-like animal with burnt red coloring. And baboons. I have lots of pictures of baboons, which are monkeys. Lots of begging, aggressive baboons. Baboons are vicious and, in my opinion, ugly. I'm sure there's people out there that love baboons, but they're very prolific. We saw more baboons than any other animal. They follow the trucks and beg for food. The Queen Elizabeth National Park lies in the floor of the Africa's Western Rift Valley, centered around Lake Edwards and Lake George, beneath the majestic backdrop of the Rwenzori Mountains, which runs from northern Uganda to Malawi. Our lodge's terrace sits on the bluff overlooking the Kazinga Channel, which flows between Lake George to Lake Edward. After settling into our lodge and having a cocktail, we watched the resident mongooses, who are part of a long-term study. There are dozens and dozens of mongooses of all shapes and sizes, and they make this squeaky little noise. I wish I'd gotten an audio of that. The next morning, we take a safari, seeing all the animals you would expect to see on an African safari. These are the only sightings we had of lions, and only because our driver saw them off in the distance. Here's another cob. They have very interesting horns, and again, that burnt red coloring. Warthogs, they are ugly, but I kind of like them. They're like the feral hogs that we have and that are so prolific here in the United States. The Cabal National population of elephants travels between Cabal and Queen Elizabeth National Park. As I mentioned before, it is 110 miles long, allowing the elephants and other animals to migrate back and forth. In the afternoon, we took a cruise, leisurely cruise. It was very pleasant, on the channel, and saw even more animals that came down to the water's edge to drink, cool off, or congregate with their own, or mingle with other species. There's several pictures here of hippos. Hippos kill more humans than any other wild animal. I really love this picture. It shows hippos with birds hitching a ride, water buffalo, baboons, elephants. Actually, there are 5 species all coexisting at the water's edge. And as you can see, these huge creatures, the elephants, are gracefully swimming along and then congregating on the edge of the canal. I have to say, you know, besides the gorillas and the chimpanzees, the elephants were just magnificent. And as you can tell, I took a lot of pictures. There are colorful birds, all kinds of birds with crests, large birds like the open-bill stork, and this orange colored bird is very, very festive. and nests. These birds were nesting. And this is a crane. All of these animals, the larger birds, were fishing in the canal. This is some boys that we saw that were swimming. And this young boy, he had such a wonderful smile. And this is a picture of the village on the crest of the hill. They make their living by fishing. They walk down from their houses on the top of the ridge to their boats. On our drive back to our lodge, we encountered these two men loaded down with bananas. They are hauling them to the market up a long hill. Look how green the bananas are. And you wonder why they have to be picked so early in order to get back to us here in the United States. But they are green as the grass. And another heavy load that these two boys are carrying, and I think, yeah, there's a picture of the sugar cane. And these two boys have no trucks. This final shot is of some children. I think they were hesitant about holding out their hands and begging, but finally they did. Let's close part 1 of Getaway Girl with a video of some African dancers. Well, that's all the time we have for Getaway Girl and the Great Apes of Africa, Part 1. I hope you can watch Part 2 to see the gorillas in Uganda and Rwanda. Hope you learn more about why traveling takes you outside of yourself and into another place that can open you up to new people, new experiences, and new inspiration. I want to thank my outstanding crew, my director, Wanda Borland, Lynn Laggins, Gary Mark Roberts, JC, David and Dorothy Nenow, and John Letts and Carol Voisin. I also want to thank Rogue Valley Community TV and SOU for providing the Digital Media Center for the recording and live broadcasting of public access shows that are created by members of our community for members of our community. To access archived public access programming, click on the link at the bottom of the page. Type in Getaway Girl and watch all episodes. I am also the producer of another Rogue Valley TV show, Girl Talk. Along with my co-host Carol Voisin, who's crewing today, we interview and showcase women of the Rogue Valley who are making a difference in our communities. Check it out on channel 115 for Ashland Home Net and 182 for Charter, on Thursdays at 6:30 p.m. or Saturdays at 3 p.m. or anytime on archive.org. That's all for Getaway Girl, and thanks for watching. Bye.
Getaway, getaway, getaway now. Getaway, getaway, getaway now. Take a plane, take a train, take a car, just getaway, getaway, getaway now. No need to be far, just getaway, getaway, getaway now. The world is small, many ports to call, just getaway, getaway, getaway now.